Some people measure wealth in dollars. Ellie measures it in dignity. When a ruthless millionaire publicly humiliates her at an upscale restaurant, she could have stayed silent, swallowed her pride. Instead, she takes a seat at the grand piano and in moments turns the entire room against him. But what happens next? You won't see it coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The evening air inside La Fontaine was thick with quiet luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over polished mahogany tables, and the hushed murmur of conversation was punctuated only by the occasional clink of fine silverware. It was the kind of place where the elite gathered, not just to dine, but to be seen. Waiters in crisp white shirts glided between tables, balancing trays of imported wine and delicate amuse-bouche, their presence barely acknowledged by the patrons. Eleanor Ellie Carter moved with practiced precision, her every step a calculated rhythm. She had learned long ago how to navigate a place like this, how to be invisible yet indispensable. She wore her uniform well, black slacks, a neatly pressed blouse, and a quiet efficiency that kept her unnoticed. That was how she preferred it. In a room filled with people who measured worth by bank accounts and last names, Ellie had no illusions about where she stood. But as she passed the gleaming grand piano nestled in the corner, her fingers twitched instinctively. She didn't look at it, wouldn't let herself. The temptation was dangerous. It had been years since she'd last played in public. Years since she had felt the weight of keys beneath her hands, the intoxicating rush of losing herself in the music. That part of her life had faded into the past, buried under the relentless demands of reality. The restaurant's heavy oak doors swung open and the air shifted. A new presence entered the space, one that commanded immediate attention. Dominic Langford strode in with the ease of a man who knew he belonged. His tailored navy suit hugged his broad frame, the faintest smirk curling at the edges of his mouth as his sharp eyes scanned the room. He was the kind of man who thrived on control, who played people like pieces on a chessboard, moving them at will for his own amusement. Trailing behind him was a carefully curated group: business partners, socialites, a woman draped in emerald silk who laughed too easily at his remarks. They settled into their reserved table, a prime spot with an unobstructed view of the entire restaurant. Ellie approached with a steady breath, schooling her features into the perfect mask of polite indifference. She took their orders, pen poised over her notepad, as Dominic barely glanced at her. To him, she was just another fixture of the evening, no more significant than the cutlery on the table. It wasn't until their drinks arrived that his attention shifted. His gaze flickered over her, assessing. "Tell me, Ellie," he mused, swirling his whiskey lazily in its glass. "Is this what you always dreamed of doing, or did life have other plans?" Ellie's grip tightened ever so slightly around the tray. She met his eyes without faltering. "I'm just here to do my job, sir." His smirk deepened. "Ah, a diplomat. But surely you had ambitions once, something grander than serving cocktails?" A few at the table chuckled, entertained by the little game he had begun. Ellie didn't take the bait. She simply inclined her head. "Ambition takes different forms," she replied smoothly, setting down a glass with care. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" Dominic didn't answer right away. He studied her, as if trying to decide whether she was worth any more of his time. Then, just as she turned to leave, one of his associates glanced toward the piano and said, "You know she used to play." Dominic's eyebrows lifted. The smirk returned. "A pianist? Now that is interesting." His voice took on a slow, deliberate cadence. "You should play something for us, Ellie. Give us a little show." The air in the restaurant shifted once more, but this time it wasn't Dominic who controlled it. It was Ellie. A hush fell over the table. The air, once filled with effortless chatter and quiet indulgence, seemed to tighten, as if the restaurant itself was waiting to see how Ellie would respond. She could feel the weight of Dominic Langford's gaze, expectant, taunting. Around him, his guests exchanged amused glances, sensing an impending spectacle. This was what men like Dominic lived for: power plays, little mind games designed to test the people around them. And tonight, it seemed, Ellie was his chosen opponent. Ellie stood motionless for a beat, her fingers pressing into the edge of the tray. Every instinct told her to ignore him, to swallow down whatever irritation sparked in her chest and walk away. That was what she had always done. It was safer to be unseen, to let insults or condescension roll off her like rain over stone. But something about this moment was different. It wasn't just the casual cruelty laced through Dominic's voice, nor was it the way his friends leaned in, eager to see her falter. It was the mention of the piano. She hadn't played in years, not since the last time she had dared to believe she could make a life out of it. Back then, music had been more than a passion, it had been her future. She had spent countless nights pouring herself into compositions, dreaming of performing on grand stages, feeling the weight of an audience hanging onto every note she played. But reality had been far less forgiving. Circumstances had crushed that dream, forcing her into a world of double shifts and late-night exhaustion, of being overlooked and undervalued. Ellie forced a polite smile. "I don't play anymore," she said, voice steady. Dominic tilted his head, his smirk deepening. "A shame," he mused, swirling his whiskey. "I would have liked to see if you were any good." A ripple of laughter spread through the table. It was a calculated dig, a veiled challenge. He wanted her to feel small, to see if he could pull a reaction from her. And for a brief moment, Ellie considered letting him have the satisfaction of walking away, of pretending she wasn't affected. But then she met his eyes, cold, confident, so certain that he had already won. Something inside her stirred. A slow, deliberate breath filled her lungs. She set her tray down on a nearby table and turned, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor as she walked toward the grand piano in the corner. A murmur spread through the restaurant. Dominic raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. His companions leaned forward, their amusement shifting into curiosity. Other diners began to take notice, heads turning, conversations pausing. Ellie slid onto the piano bench, her hands hovering just above the ivory keys. A tremor ran through her fingertips. It had been so long. Could she still do this? For a heartbeat, doubt crept in. Then she exhaled and played. The first note rang out, clear and resonant. Then another, and another. The music unfolded like a story long buried, each chord rich with emotion, each melody unraveling something deep within her. It wasn't just technique or precision. It was raw, powerful, aching with everything she had kept locked away for so many years. The restaurant fell utterly silent. Even the waitstaff, accustomed to the rhythm of their routine, had stopped in their tracks. Patrons who had barely noticed her before were now transfixed, watching as the quiet waitress transformed into something else entirely. Someone who commanded the room not with wealth or arrogance, but with sheer, undeniable talent. Ellie didn't look at Dominic, didn't seek out his reaction. She didn't need to. She could feel it. The shift in the air, the unspoken recognition that he had miscalculated. He had expected a reluctant, fumbling attempt, something he could mock and dismiss. Instead, he had given her a stage, and she had taken it. The final note hung in the air for a long moment, before fading into silence. Then applause. Not just polite claps, not just obligatory appreciation. It was genuine, rising from tables across the room. People who had no idea who she was, but knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Ellie stood, her pulse still thrumming with the remnants of the music. She turned back to Dominic's table. He sat stiffly, his smirk wiped away, his whiskey forgotten in his hand. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Ellie picked up her tray with the same quiet composure she had always carried. She met Dominic's gaze, holding it for just a moment, then spoke. Soft, controlled, but with unmistakable finality. "Was that good enough for you?" Then she turned and walked away, leaving him in stunned silence. For a moment, the only sound in the restaurant was the lingering echo of Ellie's final note, still resonating in the stunned silence that followed. It was as though the entire establishment had collectively held its breath, absorbing the weight of what had just transpired. Then, like a tidal wave, the applause swelled, scattered at first, then growing into a rousing ovation. Diners who had been oblivious to Ellie just moments ago were now on their feet, clapping, murmuring in astonishment, craning their necks to get a better look at the waitress, who had just transformed into a maestro before their eyes. Ellie, still seated at the piano, exhaled slowly, her fingers gently lifting from the keys. Her heart pounded, not with fear or uncertainty, but with the exhilarating rush of long-dormant passion reawakening. She had forgotten what this felt like, the sheer power of music to silence a room, to demand attention in a way that words never could. She had not planned for this moment, had not expected it, but somehow it had found her all the same. She stood, smoothing her uniform as if that simple gesture could tether her back to the reality of who she was, or at least who she had convinced herself she was. But there was no escaping it now. The world had seen her. There was no going back to invisibility. Across the room, Dominic Langford remained seated, his usual air of unshakable confidence stripped away. His whiskey glass sat untouched, his fingers resting against the table, stiff with tension. The smirk that had played so easily on his lips throughout the evening was gone. In its place was something else, something harder to define. Disbelief, humiliation, or perhaps something that unsettled him even more, admiration. Ellie met his gaze, unflinching. "Was that good enough for you?" she asked again, her voice smooth, steady. Dominic blinked, his jaw tightening. Around him, his guests shifted uncomfortably. The mood at the table irrevocably changed. Moments earlier, they had been laughing, entertained by what they had assumed would be a moment of embarrassment for a mere waitress. Now, they sat in uneasy silence, as though unsure of where to look, how to recover from their misjudgment. One of the women at the table, a socialite draped in expensive silk, leaned toward Dominic and murmured something in his ear, her expression a mix of intrigue and amusement. Whatever she said only seemed to darken his mood further. Then, in an unexpected move, Dominic picked up his glass and raised it slightly toward Ellie, as though in a mock toast. His lips curved, but there was no arrogance in the gesture this time, no condescension. "Well played," he said, his voice quieter than before, yet edged with something that made the moment feel like more than just a concession. It was an acknowledgement. Ellie didn't respond. She simply gave a polite, almost indifferent nod before turning on her heel, picking up her tray, and walking back toward the kitchen as though nothing had happened. But everything had changed. As she passed through the dining area, murmurs followed her. Whispers of recognition, of admiration, of curiosity. She could feel the weight of eyes lingering on her, could sense that for the first time in years, she was not just another nameless figure blending into the background. People saw her now. They would remember her. Back in the kitchen, the staff erupted into hushed excitement. "Ellie, what was that?" Miguel, one of the line cooks, demanded, his eyes wide. "Since when do you play like that?" Even the usually gruff manager Carl seemed momentarily thrown. He crossed his arms, studying Ellie with newfound scrutiny. "You sure you're in the right line of work?" he muttered. Ellie gave a small shrug, pretending not to be affected, though her pulse still thrummed with the adrenaline of it all. "Just something I used to do," she said, keeping her voice neutral. But she could see it in their faces. No one believed that. This wasn't just a hobby. This was something bigger. She pushed through the rest of her shift, ignoring the way patrons continued to glance her way, the way some even attempted to engage her in conversation. She just wanted to finish her night, to slip away before the weight of what had happened fully settled over her. But the universe had other plans. As she clocked out and grabbed her coat, she felt a presence at her side. "Miss Ellie." She turned, and to her surprise, Dominic Langford stood there. Up close, stripped of the performance of wealth and arrogance, he looked different. There was no smug superiority now, just a man who had clearly been shaken out of his usual self-assured existence. "I didn't expect that," he admitted. Ellie raised an eyebrow. "That makes two of us." He let out a soft, almost reluctant chuckle. Then, after a pause, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card, offering it to her. "I have connections in the music industry. I know people who would kill to hear someone play like that." Ellie stared at the card, but she didn't take it. "You underestimated me," she said, not as an accusation, but as a fact. Dominic didn't deny it. "I did." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the card. Not as a promise, not as an acceptance, but as a possibility. "Good night, Mr. Langford," she said, turning to leave. As she stepped out into the crisp night air, the card warm in her palm, she realized something. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a closed door. It felt wide open. The night air was crisp as Ellie stepped out of the restaurant, the hum of city life buzzing faintly in the distance. She loosened the grip on her coat, inhaling deeply, as if trying to absorb the reality of what had just happened. The small black card in her hand felt heavier than it should, more than just a piece of cardstock. It carried the weight of something she had long buried. Opportunity. For years she had convinced herself that music was a door that had already closed, locked behind her by the practicalities of survival. But tonight that door had been kicked open, not just by Dominic Langford's challenge, but by her own refusal to remain invisible. She had shown him, that she was more than just a waitress fetching drinks. She had reminded herself of who she once was, who she still was, beneath the exhaustion and routine of daily life. Yet, as empowering as the moment had been, doubt began to creep in. Could she really step back into that world? Did she even want to? She had spent years telling herself that talent alone wasn't enough, that life had a way of forcing dreams into submission. Was it worth trying again, only to face the possibility of failure? She turned the card over between her fingers. Dominic Langford, a man she had spent the evening resenting, yet now he had placed something unexpected in her hands. An option, an invitation. "Maybe this is nothing," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. "Or maybe it's everything." The next morning, Ellie sat at her small kitchen table, the business card lying in front of her like a puzzle she wasn't sure how to solve. A part of her wanted to throw it away, to dismiss the night as nothing more than a passing spectacle. But another part of her, one she hadn't listened to in a long time, urged her to at least find out what was possible. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed. A smooth, professional voice answered almost immediately. "Dominic Langford's office." Ellie hesitated. What was she even going to say? Yes, this is Ellie Monroe. He gave me his card last night." There was a brief silence, followed by a shift in tone. "Ah, Miss Monroe. Mr. Langford mentioned you might call. He has some time this afternoon if you're available." She hadn't expected that. She had assumed he would have already forgotten that the card had been nothing more than a rich man's offhanded gesture. But no, he had anticipated her call. "This afternoon?" she echoed. "Yes. Will you be able to meet him at his office?" Ellie's fingers tightened around the phone. She could say no. She could walk away, continue with her life as it was. But for the first time in years, her life as it was no longer seemed enough. "Yes," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll be there." By the time she arrived at Dominic Langford's office, a sleek glass building in the heart of downtown, she had rehearsed a dozen different ways to approach the conversation. Should she play it cool, as if she wasn't affected by the events of the previous night? Or should she acknowledge the impact, let herself be vulnerable enough to admit that something had shifted in her? As she was led into his office, Dominic stood from behind his desk, regarding her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I wasn't sure you'd call," he admitted. Ellie folded her arms. "I wasn't sure either." A slow smirk pulled at his lips. But it wasn't the arrogant one she had seen the night before. This time, there was something else in it. Respect. "Good," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "That means this conversation is going to be interesting." And with that, Ellie stepped into a world she had once left behind. This time, on her own terms. Days turned into weeks, and Ellie found herself navigating a world she had once dreamed of but had long believed was beyond her reach. Dominic Langford, true to his word, had arranged a private audition for her at a prestigious venue, a place where talent was not merely appreciated but expected. As she sat backstage waiting for her turn, she felt the weight of every moment that had led her here. The humiliation, the doubt, the fear, all of it had been necessary. Without them, she might have never found the courage to reclaim what was hers. The murmurs of the small but discerning audience reached her ears. Some of them knew her story. Dominic had made sure of that. A former prodigy lost in the struggle of survival, making an unexpected return. It added drama to the performance, a layer of intrigue. But Ellie didn't want to be a story. She wanted to be heard, to be felt. She wanted her music to speak for itself. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the stage. The grand piano gleamed under the lights, waiting for her touch. For a brief moment, she hesitated, hands hovering above the keys. Then, she let go. The first note rang out, pure and resonant, filling the space with a haunting beauty. She didn't think about the people watching, about Dominic's presence in the audience, or even about what this moment could mean for her future. She simply played. And as the music poured from her fingertips, Ellie felt something she hadn't in years. Freedom. By the time she struck the final chord, the room was silent. Then, slowly, applause began to build, swelling into something thunderous. Ellie stood, breathless, as she saw not just appreciation in their eyes, but recognition. They knew now she was not just a waitress, she was an artist. After the performance, Dominic approached her, an unmistakable gleam in his eyes. "I knew you had something, but that..." He shook his head, almost in disbelief. "That was something else." Ellie let out a breathless laugh. "So, what now?" He smirked. "That depends on you. Are you ready for this?" She looked past him, out into the world that had once felt so closed off. There was still fear, still uncertainty, but beneath it all, there was something stronger. "Yes," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am." As she stepped forward, she knew the journey was only beginning. But this time, she wasn't running from life. She was stepping boldly into it. Ellie's journey is more than just a story of redemption. It's a testament to the power of resilience, self-worth, and the courage to reclaim one's destiny. In today's fast-paced world, where talent is often overlooked and potential buried under life's struggles, her story reminds us that no matter how far we stray from our dreams, we always have the power to return to them. We all face moments of doubt, times when the world underestimates us. But like Ellie, we must refuse to let others define our worth. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't let it stop here. Share it with someone who might need that extra push to believe in themselves. And if you want to hear more stories of resilience and triumph, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us on this journey of inspiration.